where did you learn to draw?
On my own, pretty much.
Where'd you grow up?
Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is another section. And then much throughout all of New York City, moving from Brooklyn to the Bronx, out to Queens and Manhattan, all around that circuit.
Where were your parents born?
Both in Romania.
And when did they immigrate to the United States?
In the early 1900s.
What did your father do?
He sold newspapers, had to help support the family, newly moved here, with great difficulty, but then enlisted, put in 5 years in the Army, and was a hell of a beautiful soldier. Had a toe shot off at Chateau Thierry, Point of Pride, and somebody that I miss very much. My mother, on the other hand, was a gentlewoman who had difficulty all her life with him and with me. And let's get on to something else.
What was your first published professional piece?
Outside of a cartoon for the high school newspaper, let me think, or the work on strips that I had done for Jerry Iger.
How'd you end up working for Jerry Iger?
When I started out of high school, there was the word out that Disney was looking for people, and you could apply by sending in drawings and taking a test, which I did do, and sure enough, I got a bus ride out to the Hyperion Studios, got on the bus. Incidentally, dear mother was with me, crying. Our son's gonna take off. Gave me a medicine bottle filled with Slivovitz brandy to tide me over. Very nice. And as I'm talking to some of the other passengers waiting to board, she spots a young lady on the bus. Her mother goes up and tells the young lady, "Be nice to my son." Thank you, Mother. It was a magnificent trip. I don't know if this gal was a hooker or not. We were on the bus, what the hell, but it was a pleasant ride. Got out to the coast, got into Disney's, was there for about 3 months, went through his training course, got up to doing in-betweening in both Fantasia and Pinocchio. Walt Disney started a bit of business where he wanted his employees, all of them, to call him Walt, not Mr. Disney. And this I remember well because I did, on occasion, make the mistake of saying, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Disney," and he glowered. So I remember that well. A guy who is that obsessive about certain characteristics that he looks for might deserve this. You know, the matter of drawing a hand in animation became customarily a four-fingered hand. Easier to deal with. You can get every hand expression you want with 4 fingers. But I know, legend, Walt was the one who said, we've got to do that. We have to eliminate that middle finger, because who knows what the hand would do with that finger if you abuse it. Got homesick. Decided to go back because the provision there was after 13 weeks, you get a new contract if you're going to be hired for another 13 weeks or you're dumped unceremoniously. That's scary. Didn't know anybody out here, so I figured I want to go back home. After working for Disney, came back to New York, got a job at Toons, inking and tracing and other stuff, and began to do samples to get into another industry, comic magazines. Put together a sample, went up to see Jerry Iger. The next thing I knew, I'm sitting at a desk. Johnny Cassoni was to my left, and behind me was André LeBlanc. And he and I could weep now. I miss him. And we did our stuff for Jerry, who was quite a character, and he had a speech impediment, and every one of us would mimic him. Turn around and speak like Jerry spoke. And I can't do it well. Mort Lev was the guy who could do that beautifully. Mort Lev, Al Bryant, Arthur Petty, and of course Reed Crandall occasionally. Lou Fine used to pop in occasionally. The great background artist was Aldo Rubano. I put in a couple of years there. Jerry suggested I take on a new strip. He had a great name idea for the strip, Dusty Rhodes. So I did it. I didn't think too highly of it. Understand that that first issue went for a lot of bucks. Lately I've seen some of the stuff that I did for War Against Crime for Byron Wood. Yeah, these were black and white representations. I was good. I didn't realize that I could really draw.
When you were working for Jerry Iger, it was after William Eisner had left, Bill Eisner had left, right?
Yeah, I was not there when Eisner was in the shop. He had left.
And so did you socialize with those guys much?
It was great, the whole bunch of us mimicking Jerry. And when he found Ruth Roche, who was a writer and seemed to be leading Jerry by the nose, which was a gorgeous woman.
How long were you in the studio itself?
A couple of years, I think. We had that kind of conviviality and wanting to work together. That big blank wall, as big as that wall over there, decided, with Jerry's permission, to do a mural of all the characters. And I remember I did Sunshine from Kid Patrol and possibly another character, and we painted up the whole damn thing. And it was gorgeous in oils. I mean, this was a hell of a job. And then, of course, one day it was all obliterated.
Did anyone ever take a picture?
I don't think so. I don't know. I remember Al Bryant working on it, Arthur Petty, and Andre. George Brenner.
Was Al Stahl there?
Al Stahl was there. Al Stahl worked at Terry Toons, and he was a character. And on one occasion, he thought it appropriate to drop paper cups filled with water off the roof there. And one splopped right in front of Terry. Al was finished. So I mentioned this to Iger, and we brought Al Stahl in. He never permitted us to stop laughing.
Did he pull practical jokes on other guys in the studio?
Constantly, yeah. I don't remember the specific jokes, but I do recall one that involved, while we were all busily working, and Jerry was in his office, Al is on his nose pushing something into Jerry's office, and we're watching, have no idea what it was or what it did, until he pops up in front of Jerry. I don't know what the end result of that was. He was a hell of a character.
Al Stahl ended up doing a lot of cartoony type strips.
And he looked like a living cartoon, really. I could draw him right now.
Do you think that people ended up doing the types of things that they were most interested in and kind of reflected their own personalities in their stuff?
Oh yeah, a lot of that. A lot of that. If you aspire in any way to be a cartoonist or like the idea of cartoons, what I have done before coming here and what I can do, and you can too, at any time, you're by yourself and the crowd passes by, you just look at people and they are all wonderful cartoons. Wonderful cartoons. Subtle, extreme, conservative, but still a cartoon. Look at all the wonderful cartoons. Be a cartoonist or don't. It's worth thinking that way. And when you come here to the comic convention, my God, that's too much. I want to see something normal.
In those days, did you sketch and use those as jumping off points or reference points for the things you were doing?
Yeah, I did. And I've made an attempt from time to time to keep a sketchbook in the John. And I have a mottled black and white marble top sink. And I can't tell you the number of great faces that are in that thing. You can't even attempt to draw them. They're so beautiful.
Did you like working in the comic book, pencils and inks?
Yeah, doing the whole thing. I like that. Didn't like the pressure necessarily, as you can imagine. But yeah, Baker.
Matt Baker.
Matt Baker, yeah. Who was a lovely guy. I remember him well. My wife remembers him. I had had a sketch of his that popped up in one of the magazines over Alter Ego, and I found it. This was where Matt did one of his women. They were all in some sense alike, the same woman, exquisite. The stuff of mine that I saw, I had 3 different lead women. And the thing was always to do a woman as beautifully as you possibly could. And whether I did or didn't, I did 3 women that were so believable for their character that I was amazed. Anyway, I had done some stuff for Topps magazine, that big thing that fell apart and did nothing. Did romance stuff, worked for Gaines before Bill and when Bill was there. Bounced all over the place and dreamed of the possibility of getting to be a book illustrator. And I lucked out. I found a guy to represent me. I had a number of agents, Nettie King, Mary Gerard. They were pretty big back then. Some guy who got me a line on a new series of books that were being produced by Bennett Cerf, called the Landmark series. I'm pulled in with a bunch of other top illustrators. These others were magnificent because years back, when I was about 15, I pulled out Knickerbocker's History of New York, illustrated by James Dougherty. That's when I looked and said, I want to do that. Came up to deal, and I see James Dougherty's stuff. Do they really want me here at this point? I made a number of visits as we worked on the first book that I would be doing for that series. Samuel Hopkins Adams wrote The Pony Express. He was lame, and I remember meeting him, came up to Louise Menino's office on crutches, and Bennett Cerf sent a call up to Louise, and the word was, please tell that son of a bitch to take a hop, skip, and a jump down here. I got to illustrate the book on the Pony Express, which became the lead book of the first 10. The Pony Express, Cowboys and Indians. And in all the ads, he was this drawing of mine, black and white. So that got me into doing about 7 of the whole batch of Landmark books that were coming out. And I got to do stuff for a bunch of other publishers. I was, in fact, a full-pledged book illustrator at that point. Incidentally, I have a folder that I put together as an advertisement for myself up to 1966. And a bunch of my artwork on 2 or 3 pages. And on the back, some mechanical drawings for science books. Quick switch, I'll do anything. I once estimated that I had illustrated about 150 books, but certainly well over 100. And ranging from preschool up to, well, not quite porno, but anything that was available for kids. And felt justified. Did a lot of stuff. I did a number of books, pre-separated art, where the artist has to provide the 4 plates, the black, red, yellow, and blue. Usually every one of them done in black for the camera. And when you're doing the yellow plate and black, and you come up with light shading representing light yellow, you don't got nothing. It's pure white. You have to anticipate and see through the colors that didn't exist into what you could create. What could be done if you were working, as I did, with an animal book, I used as the final color a light sky blue. Therefore, if I painted a black sky, I have a light sky blue color. For the red and yellow, the red was a terracotta. The yellow was a Naples yellow or a yellow ochre. It's yellowish brown and reddish brown and blue. And when you put these together, at least your animals will look like fur or skin. And the sky is going to look like a sky. And you could even get something of a green between that yellow and the blue. But to think through these colors and see what's going to happen as the end result. The Winning of the West was the first book I did that way. And of course, the work was not done in wash or paint, but to control things, crayon, on Dynabase, which was a toothy, transparent material. The end result in reproduction was like a pretty nice drawing by a kid who was very careful with his crayons when he put in the color, but I got away with it. And then when I learned how to use the medium, I did some things that I look at, did I do that? You know, came a time when I was working at Doubleday, hired as an artist in residence. I was told by Bill, we don't have anything for you to do. I would be with Roy Gallant's books, and we were kind of hired as a team, and others. But there was nothing for me to do at this point. And Bill said, write a book. I don't write. I draw pictures. He said, do you want to work here? Yeah, write a book. Oh, he said, make it a book on drawing. Came up with a thing called Draw, Draw, Draw. Incidentally, I'm trying to get that back into publication now at Dover Publishing, because that started what ultimately became the Draw 50 series. Draw's small book. Since I was employed, they didn't give me an advance, but they did give me a royalty. But the royalty was 10 pennies, not 10%. Figure that. But the book went on to sell about 50,000 copies. However, I did lose that job and went home crying. Loved what I had been doing, out of work. Back to comics for a while, and into studio work. Became a partner with Don Rowe in a studio, and gradually matched my income, even though. And then, hey, Draw was a nice venture. Why not do a sequel to that? I go back to Doubleday, and I meet Seth Agnew, I think his name was. Very nice guy, and we discussed it. Yep. My idea was not a one-subject book, which apparently did cartoons, da-da-da-da. I said, how about we do a book, big fat book, 150 pages at least, a book entitled Draw People, Places, and Things. They gave me a $1,000 advance. The book was to be delivered by 1966. Much was discussed, and I started preparing samples for it. How do you deal with that long title? And they pushed and pulled. How do you organize the book? By subject matter, by alphabetical? Delay. The editor died. Another editor with whom I had worked before, a lovely lady, Blanche Van Buren, she couldn't figure out what to do with it either. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. We are now up to 1966. She died. John Ernst, the new editor, calls me in. He says, we would like you to keep the advance, don't worry about that, but just sign here that you won't take this idea to any other publisher. So I kept the advance, I didn't sign anything. Screw you, hell with that. Left and forgot about it. A year or two after that, I am now in a studio of my own, doing science illustrations. Why don't I go back to the new editor, a guy I knew, Tom Ellsworth, and maybe we can do a sequel to that book. So I go up to see him, and we have our drinks, which were very good. And he said, why don't we stick with the old contract? The only difference is, instead of doing 150, we'll do 50. I had most of the first subject matter done. I chose to do the animals. Okay, so we did draw 50 animals, and it took off. And I mean, that was it. It just blew everything apart. But one interesting thing, how do you deal with showing the steps in a nice loose oval for the body of the animal? Loose, gotta have that pencil-like look. Step number one. Well, you've got to get that for step number two. So I carefully traced the rough look for number two, and again for number 3, 4, 5, and 6. And when I got to number 2 and added, you know how long it took to do just the rough outlines for one goddamn animal? And then the whole book? After 2 or 3 books, I realized, do step number 1 on tracing paper, make a copy of it, and it went. Anyway, that's how the Draw 50s started. And to date, they've sold over 3 million, which is very nice. And I've just completed the very last one, which is called the Draw 50 Way, which is a very stupid title, but they've done that to me over and over again. I wanted the last title to be Draw 75 or Draw 60, close enough to Draw 50. But now we know it's different, and it's a fatter book. They compromised on the fact of Draw 60, which is a little bit fatter, but they insisted on calling the Draw 50 Way with 10 bonus sketches.
Well, the reason I answered the question about being in the studio and doing all the work, there obviously there's downside to being in a studio and there's upside to being in a studio.
Yeah.
So do you feel that you ended up benefiting from it by the fact that you had so much work and so much pressure to get stuff done that you were forced to draw more than you probably would if you hadn't been in the circumstances?
I think the quick answer is the competition of all that talent around that you had to match or go by and pass if you could. Hey, except for the guys who were not very likable, except for me. No, we're a lovable bunch of guys. The competition was very healthy. Never forget the story. It has nothing to do with that. When Tuska was watching a girl drawing a woman, and he spoke with difficulty because he was hard of hearing, and she was trying to make this sexy, and he looked at her and said, "The tits are too big."